Brian Nichols, welcome to the show, man.
What's up? How you doing, Brent? Thanks for having me on.
No problem, no problem. Very excited to get you on here. I think we have a lot of overlap. Just for those who don't know, I think you're kind of in the political realm, kind of in the libertarian-ish circles, and also I think you have sort of an interest in religion too. If I'm sort of grokking your account properly, those are kind of like the two high points that I was able to suss out so far. And so I kind of wanted to focus on those two topics, right? Kind of broadly speaking. We'll start with the easy one first. So I want you to sort of give your high level overview of kind of what your philosophy is around politics. I mean, it's a loaded term. There's ethical components to this. There's obviously the political sphere. I just wanted to sort of give me your view of kind of how you see things, how you'd like the world to be in a perfect world.
The perfect world, magic wand, give me a Matt Kibbe's don't hurt people, don't take people's stuff approach, right? I remember bringing that to the table back like 5, 6 years ago to a lot of folks in my world who were just completely agnostic when it comes to politics. And that seemed to be the one that really hit people the most. They heard that and they said, I get it. And I think that right there is where, for me as a libertarian, I had to figure out a way, how do we take what normally we throw a book at somebody and we say, read this book and you'll know what it means to be a libertarian. Instead, how do we condense it in such a way that it could just be a quick interaction and somebody can leave that interaction knowing maybe not everything I believe, but they at least have the context, the framework of where I'm starting out. So at the end of the day, man, it's as simple as it can be. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff.
Got it. And I totally vibe with that. And I think I share a similar view. I guess the devil's in the details, man. Like you've seen libertarians notorious for fighting with you. I don't know why. I don't know why the folks that are most concerned with liberty seem to be the most intent on being at each other's throats, but it is definitely a thing. So let me poke at that a little bit. So do you believe that absolutely? Right? Is this sort of like a line in the sand? You don't steal from people, meaning don't take their stuff, and you don't hurt people. Are those like absolutes, or is there gray areas for those two?
So what does hurt mean, right? What does harm mean?
Yeah.
And this has actually been a conversation that's really been creeping up here on my show recently because my history, I entered into the libertarian movement kind of like, I say most people, right? You looked at the red team, the blue team, you found yourself tossing your hands up being like, they both kind of suck. So maybe this gold team is better. Started to dig into libertarianism, so understanding why these different political parties are different and specifically the value that Libertarian Party brings to the table. And what I've seen happen, and I don't know if you've seen this, Brent, but there are folks in the libertarian movement who do not embrace libertarianism, but rather express themselves as libertine. So I think we need to have libertarianism, but with our own confines and safeguards that we put in place, right? Not some government body, right? But us. We're the ones who are holding each other to account. So how do we do that? Well, we can still respect the idea of don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, but what do we as libertarians believe? We believe in property rights. We believe in self-defense. So in that perspective, in that mentality, I look at don't hurt people and don't take their stuff as much as an offensive as it is defensive position. Because as soon as somebody starts to hurt you or start to cause harm or take your stuff, you have a responsibility to respond to that and to stop them from doing that, to stop them from causing harm, to stop them from hurting people and taking their stuff. So let's take this to a micro level, right? Look at the trans kids issue. You look at the drag queen storybook issue. The idea of harm, even though it is, the drag queens aren't hurting kids, they're not going out and they're not causing physical harm to kids. I would very confidently say no, but they're harming the kids' understanding of reality. They're harming the kids' ability to look at right and wrong, normal and not normal. Well, Brian, what does normal mean? No, that's a great question, right? What does normal mean? But you can look at something like a guy dressing like a creature and obviously trying to make a characterization of themselves and know that that's not normal, right? So it's okay for us to address when things are right and when things are wrong. We can accept people have different perspectives, but we don't have to tolerate those perspectives. I can adamantly and forcefully say, no, your ideas are wrong. And that's okay. But libertarians, I think by and large, have gotten way too comfortable with this live and let live mentality. Well, everybody should be able to believe anything they want. Well, no, we still have to live in the real world. We still have to be able to look at words and understand what those words mean, what terms mean, what definitions mean, what a man is, what a woman is, because we can't build a society around something that has no substance to it. It's like trying to build a structure out of sand. Like, good luck. You're not going to have a firm foundation to build that upon. So I think when it comes to don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, there is more to unpack there. But as a general rule, it's a good rule. But when you go into the weeds, obviously there's going to be areas where you have to play your role as both someone who is bringing the ism that is libertarianism to people, while also saying, hold up, we don't mean just free for all, right? It's not a no holds barred, anything goes society. And if we want to bring that mentality to the public, we're going to lose, because believe it or not, most people don't buy into that. More and more, we're starting to see that people are rejecting this insanity. They're rejecting the nonsense, and rightfully so, because it is nonsense. It's not normal. And if we're just ignoring the reality, the normal reality of the world, then people are going to ignore us, and who can blame them, right?
Yeah, yeah, you said a lot there. So thank you for that.
Sorry,
No, no,
sorry.
no, no. Do not apologize. You touched on a lot of important topics, right? And so I'm just trying to think the best way to respond to that. So because I have some questions and I have some responses.
Yeah.
So to respond, first of all, like I think that we agree that like if we believe in liberty truly, and I think the founders talked about this a lot, which is that you can't really have individual liberty, a society that respects individual liberty, without responsibility. Right? These things go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
They're two sides of the same coin. I think that's there's a lot of people that don't appreciate that component, right? Like you said,
Yep.
I keyed in on that term libertine, right? This is just like, hey, complete debauchery, anything goes, everything's fine. And I don't agree with that at all, right? Like I'm a very big proponent of personal responsibility, but I'm also like a hardcore freedom advocate, right? So I think you've sussed out two important topics. One, which is like allowing people freedom, right, to live their life how they want to live, right? But then you have this other component of tolerance, right, which I also get, like, which is your freedom to say, I don't like that, right? Like if you don't like drag time story hour, if you don't like issues around trans, right, or whatever the topic might be, where people might have like a fundamental disagreement, you have a right to speak what you feel about it, right? The thing I'm trying to hone in on, and I guess it's not super clear to me from your response, is when you would initiate force against somebody, right? Because this goes back to the harm thing, which I think you rightly called out as difficult to suss out entirely. And I think it is a very slippery slope, because there are a lot of ways that people can claim that you're harming them, right? For example, you're driving a car, Brian, and you're emitting CO2. Now you're
Yep.
you get what I'm saying, right? Like I'm trying to
Yep.
be serious about this. It's very difficult to suss out sort of second order, third order, whatever effects that potentially could cause harm to somebody, right? And traditional libertarians would say, hey, we're governed by the non-aggression principle. That's sound moral philosophy that states essentially in a nutshell that you cannot hurt people and take their stuff, right? You cannot initiate force or fraud against anyone else, right? You can respond, defensive force is fine, right? And so from your perspective, with those sort of with that groundwork you laid and some of the examples you put forward, I guess it's unclear to me where you would draw that line, right? Like, do you have an example of where, like, hey, I'm actually willing to use force, in these situations? Because it's
Yep.
just still a little bit muddy for me.
No, that's a great question too, Brent. And by the way, this is a question that libertarians get asked a lot by, and I'm going to apologize for the term, but the normies out there, right? Because we're bringing a very different way of not just addressing political problems, but more often than not, it requires us to really, I don't want to say redo, but like we have to almost reframe the way we approach governance when we're looking at the ism that is libertarianism and we bring it to our world of politics. So let's first address the elephant in the room, and that is you and I don't have that magic wand, right?
Mhm.
We can't make this perfect society where everybody is agreeing to the don't hurt people and don't take their stuff mentality. As a matter of fact, there are people who are actively against us, right? People who actively sell against us, compete against us, and try to destroy us. So we have to go in first of all acknowledging the elephant in the room that we are not all on the same team. All right. that's great to acknowledge. So when we look at harm, right? How do we best deal with harm? And let's be fair here, right? Not just from the libertarian perspective, but let's look at our lefty friends. The lefty friend who says, Brent, you're driving your car and you're killing me,
Mhm.
right? You're causing me harm. So to those people, even though I would say that specific person, they definitely has some mental issues they need to work through. Let's at least create an environment where they feel that they have more control to be around those that think like them and can build the society that they want, right? So this is why I think we as libertarians have an obligation to focus more on local and state politics, because that is where, if there ever was an argument for force, right? That is where at the very least we can have the most consistent of those arguments, because as you get more and more towards your local communities, you're going to have more and more of a vested interest in the members of those communities relative to the structure of the community, what is and is not allowed. And frankly, it gives people more of an opportunity to build the society in that community that they want. So we see, the ability to move with our feet. I have moved from New York down to Philadelphia. And after 7 years in Philadelphia, I now find myself in Indiana. I moved with my feet primarily during the advent of COVID, because I saw that people in my community weren't on board. And not only weren't on board, but like in Philadelphia, it's 70-80% Democratic, progressive, left-leaning folks that me as a small L libertarian, I knew I was facing an uphill battle. So instead of feeling like I'm going to be the oddball out, I'm going to have to deal with people saying, Brian, you're causing harm because you're not getting your COVID vax, right? I said, fine, you guys live in La La World, build your little, leftist utopia, go get your 17 vaxes, and I'm going to move to Indiana. I'm not going to have to deal with this. I'm going to build a community that I feel that not only do I have more of a role in building, but also with people that I share values with. So it's more important to first look at the people that we're working with, right? It's people that we need to focus on shared values, shared principles, shared morals, versus trying to get everybody on board with this big libertarian idea. Because back to my original point, Brent, like not everybody is on board with libertarianism, and actually more people are against the idea of libertarianism. So instead of going in with this pie in the sky mentality that we're going to create this perfect environment in every city, every state, every country, let's go, to the Jordan Peterson approach, right? Clean your own room first, make your own bed first. And that starts with us looking at our communities. But let's take it even a micro step further. Let's go to the family. Let's look in
Mhm.
your own house, right? Behind your closed doors. What are you doing to help create a good environment, not just to have a fruitful, successful life, but to create the foundations to have that carry forward, right? What are you teaching your children? What are you helping them avoid? Are you helping make sure that your kids are getting practical education versus being sent off to a government school? And these are the little things that people can do to start building up a better society, because just as Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. So when we have all the blue-haired folks out there screaming that because we're driving a car, we're causing harm, or because we didn't get our COVID shot, that we're causing harm, it's okay. Let them scream and let them build their little society with each other in Philadelphia, New York, in Los Angeles, San Francisco. They're going to have fun and they're going to run their cities into the ground. They already are. But I'm going to surround myself with people who understand that approach is silly, right? And by the virtue, and this is literally just like how the markets work, by the virtue of our market doing better versus to those other markets, that will show in essence the win loss, right? What side did better and what side didn't. We've seen this over the past 4 years with COVID. So you can look at the idea of harm, see what actually works and what doesn't work, but instead of saying we need to do this one size fits all approach for the entire country, bring it to your local levels, have more success there, build yourself up in your community, have relationships in your community, become a noted member of your community, and make your community better before you try to make the entire country or planet or world or galaxy better, which a lot of our lefty friends really want to do, and frankly a lot of our neocon friends too.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Like that is completely jiving with something that I talk about a lot, which is it's really the core of this channel, right? Which was really that I started my entire presence on social media to improve myself and then also to improve the world through setting a good example, having conversations with people about important topics, right? That's what aiming up is about, and actually comes from a Jordan Peterson a lecture, right? Like it's so simple, and starting local and working your way out, that is the way I believe. Like you change the world by changing yourself. And I think oftentimes politics ends up being an obsession for people who don't want to take responsibility, because it's a way to sit back, do nothing, and point fingers at people, be on a team, get your talking points from people that are doing the thinking for you, and then feel like you're doing something, right? So I agree with you on that, but I will push back a little bit, because
Hit me with it.
when you think about, like, I get like leaving from because I did the same thing, right? Like I was in Seattle for the prior 10 years, and then I ended up moving to Nashville, right? And it's better, right? In a whole lot of ways, but in some ways it's worse, right? Because like being a libertarian, believing in freedom, you sort of have, the blue team has their issues they want freedom about, and they want to restrict everyone on, and the red team is the inverse, right? So there's not really anywhere you can go where there's actual freedom, right? It's just different issues. I found this like multiple times, because I lived in Utah, which is a red state, and I moved to Seattle, it's a blue state, or Washington is a blue state, Tennessee is a red state. Like it's like nowhere has freedom. It's just a question of how much more or less relative freedom you have on any given particular topic, right?
Yep.
And so for me though, it's almost like, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because it does, right? Like I saw a huge difference moving from Washington to Tennessee. Like there's a lot more freedom here on the things that I care about. For example, the gun issue, right? So it's constitutional carry state. There's no restrictions on this stuff. If somebody breaks into my house, I'm not going to get prosecuted for taking care of a home intruder, right? There's a bunch of things that are really important to me. As a father of 3 girls at home, I care about certain things, right? But ultimately, the state is the state, right? And the state is force, the state is violence. It's just a question of which issues they're going to be enforcing, right? So there's not really freedom anywhere. And so with all that said, I'm not trying to like throw a wet blanket on the party. Like I believe that we can change, and I still agree. You start with yourself, work outwards, politics downstream, culture, all that stuff. Like I believe all of that entirely. That's why I'm talking about these issues, right? And that's why I'm trying to sort of get into the philosophical weeds with you, not necessarily utilitarian, right? Because I think a lot of people look at these issues from a utilitarian perspective. How can I, engage the system in a way that's going to achieve, more freedom? And, I think it's a waste of time. I've seen, I got all excited about Ron Paul's first campaign and, second campaign. And I saw, it's like, hey, man, like this isn't going to happen. Like you said, you have to actually change people's minds, right? Like unless you talk to people about ethics and sort of make people understand the immorality of state violence, I don't think you can move the needle, right? And also, to the point I raised earlier, unless you change people's minds with respect to responsibility, personal individual responsibility, trying to adopt some responsibility, I don't think you're going to move the needle, right? So I just want to put that aside a little bit. Like having said all that, and I want to talk to you personally, like about like what, like I keep trying to go back to this issue, and I've said it before on my show, which is like, when y'all bringing the guns out? Like at what point are you initiating violence against somebody else? Like, do you have a list? Have you thought about it deeply? Because I don't think a lot of people necessarily have. I think more people in the libertarian community have probably thought about this, but I want to know what your thoughts are. And I think it might help to go back to one of the tweets that you posted from Milton Friedman. And tell me if this resonates with you, or maybe what you agree with, what you disagree with, or if you agree with all of it. It says government has 3 primary functions. It should provide for military defense of the nation. It should enforce contracts between individuals. It should protect citizens from crimes against themselves or their property. When government, in pursuit of good intentions, tries to rearrange the economy, legislate morality, or help special interests, the costs come in inefficiency, lack of motivation, and loss of freedom. Government should be a referee, not an active player.
I mean, yes, but so Milton Friedman presented that quote as the ideal, right? But in the idea of what we live in right now, what is our world? I take my political persuasions and I try to, instead of pushing them by force, right? Which, to your question, I think that is the quickest way to get people to have an instinctual reversion to your ideas. And here's the context behind that. Think of when you were a kid, and anytime your parent asked you to do something and they just said, just do it. Why? Because I'm the parent, right? And we get that instinctual, like, well, F you. No, I don't want to do that. I need to have the context to the why, right? Now, that's not everybody. But for me, I'm a sales executive by trade. I teach this stuff. I teach how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. So with that, let's take, the Milton Friedman quote. I think if you look at those specific issues that Milton Friedman addressed, those are actual, things that you bring to a majority of people. I think a lot of folks would find themselves nodding in agreement. Now, for sure, there are folks who are going to be like, "Oh, no, that's terrible. We need more Paul Krugmans in the world, right, Brent, to help us understand that the internet will have no significant impact on our society, no
Just a
more than the
fax
fax
machine.
machine."
Yeah.
Just the fax machine. But like, in that mentality, if you are able to meet the voter that you're going after where they're at on whatever specific issues they personally care about, which you need to figure that out by asking great questions, by understanding who you're speaking to. But also, I think this goes in a step further. Libertarians, by and large, spend way too much time going after people that will never vote libertarian. We like to spend time arguing about libertarianism and why we're right, and we'll go after commies and socialists and Democrats and neocons, and we'll tell them all day long why they're wrong, and we'll argue with them on social media and show that we're right. But in terms of taking that and applying it to building something better and bigger, we have to really know who we're targeting. And I call this our ideal voter persona. In business, we call it our ICP, right? Our ideal customer persona. So who is it? Not just the person, but like what do they represent? Find your what does your ideal voter look like? Let's call that voter Bob. What does Bob believe in? What does Bob like? What does Bob not like? What does Bob care about? And understand who that perfect Bob would be, right? Bob, Bill, whoever you want to call him. And go after the people that are already leaning towards your values, whatever the main drivers may be, right? If it was, from the Milton Friedman quote, it's to protect people from being harmed from their property or their persons, right? Let's go through, talk to the suburban moms, right, who they watch The View every morning and they feel that the world is one step away from going into complete chaos. We're all gonna be wearing our red robes because it's The Handmaid's Tale. Let's talk to them about safety, security, but let's do so through a libertarian sales argument, right? A sales statement versus trying to defend and excuse away libertarianism. Let's lead with why libertarianism, and by the way, this is all without saying the words libertarianism, but let's build solutions and then present those solutions to people to show that the fears they have, not only should they not necessarily be fears, but those fears, if they are a fear, are already being addressed by some solution that's out in the marketplace without a city council giving a green light, without a state legislature saying, "Oh, this might be a good idea," but we need to have a couple more, think tanks to go through this and see if this really makes sense. We can just start doing these things now. So bringing these solutions to the table that overtly don't need us to require a use of force. We can bring these solutions to the table right now. I don't need to go to my city council and like freak out at a city council meeting because they're not building, the rec center the way I want it to be built. You can work right now with your community, start figuring out ways to, work with business owners, work with community leaders, and start building that solution outside of the government system. That, in my opinion, Brent, is going to be the best way for us to bring libertarianism to the masses without it being this approach of using force. Because in just that knee-jerk reaction back to when we were kids, I feel that we're going to get that as well when we try to force feed libertarianism onto a populace that, frankly, and I don't know about you, man, but like COVID was the ultimate means to tell me that no, the belief I had was not true. People are not, by and large, libertarian at their
Not
core.
at all.
It's not the case. And I used to believe that. I used to believe, oh my goodness, people are libertarian. They just need to hear the thing that they're really libertarian on to get on board. And then COVID happened. And I saw people that I would have these conversations with who were like on board with the ideas of liberty. And then COVID hits and they're like, no, government said we gotta stay home.
Yep.
I'm not essential. Give me the shot. Like, what? Where did this happen? And it hit me like, oh, it's because more people aren't just like, yeah, I'm a libertarian, I just don't know it yet. There are people who have libertarian issues they care about, and let's focus on those issues. But the goal of just making people libertarian, I think it's a fool's errand, candidly.
Yeah, I agree. And I was aghast during COVID watching and seeing a lot of people that talked a whole bunch of shit about, oh, the folks that talk about, oh, we're gonna, take over the government if they try to do X, Y, and people that
No, you're not.
provided, I'm talking zero friction. They might have provided some lubricant in that process. Like I couldn't believe how quickly people folded. It was shocking to me, and I was very, I don't want to say cynical. I was very skeptical of anyone's belief in any form of liberty before COVID, and that basically erased the last of it. So, and that's why I'm focused on trying to help people improve and try to help people understand that adopting responsibility is good for them and it's good for the world. Because
Yeah,
I
and by the way, really quick, Brent, like to that, I don't mean to interrupt, but like you mentioned the idea of adopting responsibility, and like my libertarian story, I used to think that my libertarian story started with the Ron Paul speaking on the 2008 debate stage. My Ron Paul, my libertarian story, my libertarian ethos didn't really come from politics. It came from that personal responsibility. Dude, I used to weigh 385 pounds.
oh
I was
wow,
huge, morbidly obese. Like I hated life. I hated how I looked. I hated how I felt. And I went on a 2-year journey of massive weight loss. I lost 180 pounds of fat.
whoa,
Then I started doing weightlifting, started getting my body built up. And I am at today the best physical shape I have ever been in. And I look at that because I saw that I was living a gross lifestyle, not from doing anything bad, nefarious things, but I was treating myself so poorly, and I wasn't taking care of myself. And very much in that libertarian, almost Jordan Peterson ethos, like the cleaning up your own room, taking care of yourself first. Like that was for me the biggest aha moment that, oh, a lot of the problems that we see are manifestations of things that we ourselves are
yes.
just turning a blind eye to. And that was a huge wake up call for me.
Man, first of all, congratulations. That is really
Thank
hard. I'm
you.
in the middle of doing that right now. I had a knee injury a couple years ago. You wouldn't know it by looking at me, but I ran a marathon in 2019. I had a pretty significant cartilage injury to my knee, and that's how I used to keep
Oh
in
no,
shape.
what happened?
I twisted it like a 90-degree twist, and I put I
Oh,
broke a flap off of the back of the kneecap and the front of the femur head, and they sort of click on each other, and they catch. And also, if they
yeah.
can't cut it off because it'll be bone on bone, it'll be worse. So I'm basically just
Yep.
managing right now. So
Yep.
I'm just having to change the way I go about things. But I put on a bunch of weight, and then there was COVID, and I wasn't taking care of myself. I had a stressful job, all the things. So I totally resonate with where you were there, and that's what actually prompted me to get on X in the first place. Is like, look, I need some accountability. I want to get some encouragement and sort of encourage other people. And so that totally resonates with me, and I'm just huge kudos, man. That is really hard to
Thank you.
do. So just mad applause for that. And I think you're right. There's something that happens when you do start adopting responsibility. It completely changes your outlook. It changes your mentality. It changes your psychology, and it changes people around you because they see you do it. They see you model behavior, and they're like, "Holy shit! If they can do it, I can totally do it too." Right? And I think that's the way you change the world, and that's how you change, people's views on a whole lot of topics. Right? But
And really quick, Brent, like I'll tell you what though, one of the things that was the most shocking for me when I lost my weight was you're 100% right. There was all these people saying like, "Oh my god, Brian, that's awesome.
Mhm.
Like I can do this too." And for every one of them, and this should have been a red flag for me. For every one of them, there was also the other people saying, "So what
Uh,
surgery did you get?
yeah.
What pill did you start taking?" Right? This Ozempic era mentality we have nowadays where it's like, "Oh, anybody who lost weight, they took Ozempic." Which I get it because we've always been looking for that instant gratification, that
Yeah.
magic pill, that magic wand, that magic shot, whether it was COVID, weight loss, like you name the issue, climate change, war on terror. There's always, some magical thing that we can do and the problem goes away, right? Isn't that how it works? And every time I heard that, like at first I got personally offended. I was like, man, like I worked myself for 2 years. Are you kidding me? And then it hit me. It's like, oh, they're not asking for me. They're
Yeah.
doing it for themselves.
Yeah.
They are looking for the easy route, or they're trying to justify why they're not there, right? Like, oh, well, Brian took the pill, right? Or Brian got a surgery. It's like, no, that I worked my ass off for 2 years. That's what it takes. And that answer was never good enough for some folks, but it really opened my eyes. It's like, oh, they it's really they are looking for some reason to explain away why he did it or why I can't do it. And that right there, it just, man, that does not encapsulate where so many people are, not just in our country, but in our world, our society. Like, there's got to be a reason why I can't be the best version of myself. It can't be the guy in the mirror. It's got to be something else. And you know what? If I had the magical pill, if I had the inheritance, if I had name whatever thing it is, just like that person did, I'd be great too. And it's like, no, man, that's not it at all. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
just wanted to call that out because you're right. People did want to know what I did. And then just for every one of those, there's people who were, not even skeptical. They were cynical. And that made me really mad, but whatever.
yeah, that hasn't been my experience, and maybe it's just because I'm connected to such a great group of people online and in real life who that the only thing I've received are, "Wow, dude, that's awesome," and then you start to get questions from them like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Like, and they start asking you nutrition questions and exercise questions, and then you start to see them improving, right? So that's been my primary experience, but I have seen some of the haters. I think there's a lot of folks that don't like to see people improve because it makes them look worse by comparison. And y'all, if you're doing that, stop that.
The
Like,
Libertarian Party. Sorry.
I just, it's easy to fall into that trap, but we should be cheering for people, anyone who's improving themselves by any means possible. Like give them a high five, man. Say something encouraging to them because it's hard to do, right? Like it's really hard. So putting that aside, I don't want to go on too big of a detour, but I want to get back because I feel like you completely answered my question. I feel like you flip back into utilitarian mode again, and you're so concerned about.
Sorry.
Like, no, it's fine. It's
Sorry.
fine. It's easy to do. You're kind of like you're. I can tell you have a very strategic mind. I can tell you're in sales, right? It's like you're trying to identify the goal. How do we get here? And my question was an ethical question, right? At the core.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. So your question was about like when does force become an option, right?
Well, yeah. In context of the Friedman quote, right? It's like he laid out the three primary functions of government, right? And so I wanted to ask you, like, are you looking at that and saying, like, okay, well, because I don't have the magic wand. You started with that.
Yep.
But in this world today, I would accept this as a baseline. Or are you saying that this is actually ethically justified behavior, right? Like, so if we had a government that was as Milton Friedman described, would that be something that you would say, no, that's actually an ethical way to arrange society or organize society?
Oh man, it's all relative. And I'm going to say relative to what we have now.
No,
yes.
no. I'm asking a very, very specific question. I'm sorry I wasn't clearer. I'm asking from an ethical perspective, and knowing that you're Christian, I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that you believe that ethics are subjective. Right. No. I would suspect that you would make the claim that ethics are objective and universal.
100%. Yes.
Cool. So that's really my crux of my question, right? So it's not from a utilitarian perspective, but if a government was constructed today, it just snapped the fingers and tomorrow this is the one that we have, the one that's outlined in Friedman's quote there, would you say that is ethical, an ethical government? Or would you say that, well, that is more ethical than it is today and I'm okay living with that type of thing? Like I'm trying to...
More ethical than it is today versus what we have today. And I would be okay living in that world. And I know I don't want to keep on going back to like the relative, because I know your point is 100% on, like, this is an ethical question. But I do believe we need to have the relative, right? Because if you're saying the Dallas Cowboys are the best football team ever, right? And I'm just saying, well, they have 5 Super Bowls. Of course they are. It's the best. But I completely left out the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers, the San Francisco 49ers, and the New England Patriots all have equal or more Super Bowls than the Cowboys. That's not fair of me to do. I need to be able to present you the full picture, right? So with that context, the full picture of where we are today, the Milton Friedman approach, without a doubt, would be infinitely more ethical than our existing system we have today. Because if you look at our system today, it's very obvious that our government not only does not fulfill those basic roles that Milton Friedman articulated, but it goes above and beyond to violate those basic roles, right? Instead of protecting people, it's actually going off its way to actively harm people. Instead of trying to enforce property laws, it's actively destroying property laws. So if I had, and again, I know the magic wand thing, but like if we were starting today, I would say Milton Friedman's approach would be a way better starting off point than where we are right now. If we were to, say you can start the race today, where what we have as a country, and then build Libertopia, or start with the ethical framework that Friedman presented and then build towards Libertopia there. I think it's almost a no-brainer that the freedmen starting off point and then going towards libertopia, which I think for most of the folks in the audience would be a Rothbard approach, right? Like, can we build Ancapistan? But again, this goes back to the ethical, what we want versus the understanding of what is. And the what is that people aren't all on board with the role of government as per Friedman's positioning, right? There are people who want to use government to cause harm. There are people who want to use government to violate property rights. So in that understanding, the goal should always be a smallest size government as possible in order to fulfill those three areas. Does that mean that it's going to be perfect? Absolutely not. Does that mean that nobody could possibly take advantage of those different values that we're instilling as government responsibility? Absolutely not. Which is why it's on us to not only create systems that make it so one size fits all approach from a federal government perspective does not become the way we go, but that we continue to promote the idea of localization, that we continue to promote states claiming back their power, that localities claim back their powers from the states. So the more we can do that, the more that those individual localities can put forth the best ethical frameworks for their societies, right? Based on the people that live there. So I hope that gave you an answer to your question. I'm not trying to beat around the bush. I really am not. I think we do need to have context when we're presenting a solution, because a solution on its own, it doesn't signify anything of inherent better or worseness than other solutions, unless you look at those solutions relative to what they have already done, or to the flip side, the negatives that they've caused. So like, if you were to just start out by saying, well, communism is great because everybody's equal and it's implemented in a perfect way, like, we already know, no, that's not how it ends up. We know that communism, even though you can paint it in the best PR and marketing and sales as you want, it ends in millions of people dead, mass graves, people lined up against the walls, people sent off to gulags and concentration camps. We know how this ends, and we're seeing it start here. But if you just presented communism as the only solution with zero context of what else is available, then that's where I think the context is so necessary. So I hope that answered your question. And if it didn't, yell at me and I'll make sure I do a better job.
Yeah, no, I think it did. What I'm going to do is I'm going to answer it the way I wanted it answered, and you can tell me if you disagree, which was, I think what you're saying ultimately is that the state as outlined by Milton Friedman is unethical, but better relative to what we have.
Yes.
Cool.
Unethical, yes. Unethical based on, yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, cool. And the reason I was, and I like to sort of drill down with people on this, is because I think that, and this is, man, I harp on this so much and people will get irritated with me. But ultimately, I don't think people have connected actual actions that they're asking the government to do on their behalf with sort of the way that same action would be carried out by an individual. They see there's like a huge disconnect, right? Like, you put on a badge and a costume, then all of a sudden you can act in a way that otherwise would get you thrown in jail for committing a crime, right? And so that's why I focus on ethics so much, because I think if you're really going to improve society, like we talked about, self-improvement, well, hey, we have to get better at treating each other, right? And understanding what is ethical treatment and what isn't. That's why I focus on it so much, right? And then you hear the libertarians talk about taxation and theft, and it's like, yeah, 100%. And this is why I'm opposed to the government. It's like, and here's where I maybe push back on you from a utilitarian perspective, is like, we had this experiment in limited government. The smallest government in human history at scale was deployed in the United States. And in 200 years, it went from the smallest government in the world to the largest government the world's ever seen. Right. And so I feel, and not only I feel there's empirical evidence to support my claim that if you try to implement limited government, you will it will fail for the same reason as limited cancer. Right? Like, yeah, it's going to start small, but guess what? It metastasizes. If you give a group of people, you have an ethical framework that's like, hey, this special group over here, they get to murder you, kidnap you, assault you, steal from you, and it's okay because reasons. As soon as you accept that
Yep.
premise, even if you have one thing that they can do, like national defense, or like that's why I was focusing on the three things that Friedman called that, which are typically.
By the way, I think I figured it out, Brent, and I don't mean to interrupt. I think I figured out my answer and why I wasn't hitting exactly what you were asking, because my answer, I guess, also goes into the context that we want to create the solution. So it goes back to my solution building, right? We want to create solutions that inherently take away the responsibility from government, right? So if going back to Friedman's approach, saying that government has the role of protecting people and property, my position isn't saying that that's ethical or not ethical, but rather let's just remove the conversation. Let's make it so we have the solutions already built. So you're in a local community, right? I'm in Indiana. It would be a lot easier to start a legitimate neighborhood watch here that would have teeth and be able to actually make society and community better, completely voluntary, right? Than it would be to reform the entire police department, or take it up a level to reform the state troopers, or to reform the FBI. If we are able to take the responsibility away from government just by the nature that we're already solving the problem on our own, then I think we're going to put ourselves in a way better spot. And I think that goes to where I was missing the mark, because it's not a matter so much of like we need to have this system versus that system, but rather, to your point, from a responsibility standpoint, let's stop deferring to government to solve these problems. Let's take back as much as we can, whether it's from the communist perspective, the socialists, the neocons, the folks like Milton Friedman, heck, even some of the libertarians. Let's take back all these folks who say, well, let's just have government do this. Okay, even if it's in a confined manner, and you just want to say government can do this, that's fine, but I'm going to have a private option, right? I'm going to start making sure that we're developing private alternatives. So even if government has the monopoly on police forcing, right? Or rather, that's the way it is right now. I can say, hey, listen, my community, we're way better because we have the neighborhood watch going, and we have some folks who, they're retired police officers, and they're volunteering their time to patrol the neighborhood. We've seen crime rates, drop exponentially, and we're having a way better, success versus New York City, Philadelphia. Name your favorite progressive city. That, I think, is where my confusion was. Did that help
No,
add the missing piece?
it did, and I totally see your mental model, right?
Cool.
So crystal clear on
Okay.
that. Like, I guess I
Cool.
just disagree, right? Because I know the way the state behaves, right? So yeah,
Yep,
you
that's
can
fair.
have your neighborhood watch, that's fine. The police, guess what? They're going to bill you for their services regardless. And if you take care of crime, you do their job for you. Do you think they're going to be like, oh, Mikey and the boys, we're going to pack up our stuff and leave? Like, well, no, nobody needs us. Like, no, they're still going to.
Well, and let me push back on that then, Brent, because I think it depends on where you live, right? So I'm not sure where you hail from. You were in Seattle. You're still in Memphis.
I'm in Nashville.
Nashville. Sorry. Okay, so you're in a red state but a blue city.
Purple city. Yeah.
Blue, purplish. Okay, yeah. So I'm technically in a blue city, but it's not really. I mean, it's a rural blue city, so
Sure.
it might as well be red. But like, do you feel that you would be able to have more of a chance in convincing people in Tennessee to bring the approach that we're talking about here from a solution standpoint versus if you were living in hyper blue city like New York City or Philadelphia?
There is a greater chance, but the chance is still statistically zero, I believe. Right? The red states, as you know, typically are very back the blue, very pro police.
Yep.
It's very difficult, and also
why though? Why are they so back the blue? Why do you think?
Well,
that
I think
is?
just comes down to, I mean, if you look at, from a psychological perspective, political leanings are heritable, right? Like if you look at the psychological literature around this, like it's largely heritable. It's largely baked into your who you are, right? And so people who are more right leaning tend to be folks that are more law and order, are more the 5 dimensions of personality. Conscientiousness is one of them. That's one of those things. They're very structured, very law and order, follow the rules, and they like no crime, and like there's all these certain things that they sort of ascribe to, right? And I don't think that these folks in any world would, I mean, I think they're more apt to do like a neighborhood watch or something, but a neighborhood watch isn't going to
Mhm.
scale. I would completely, I would be very skeptical of the idea of a neighborhood watch. Like, I am very open to the idea of policing, market policing, right? So you have companies like you
Mm.
have cell phone providers, you have T-Mobile, you have Sprint, AT&T,
Yeah,
Verizon, whatever,
absolutely.
and whoever provides you with the best service that you choose, right? There might be different levels of protection. Somebody who has a lot of money and a lot of property might need more services, right? Or you might just need a basic plan. I got this small house here. Just, hey, make sure nobody breaks into my house. Make sure it doesn't burn down. And hey, maybe protect my person. With technology, we could have, who knows what type of technology that we could have with Internet of Things and mobile phones. There's all this
For
technology could
sure.
be deployed to protect you. The problem I have, like why I'm pushing back, is I don't see any evidence that the state, at any level, local, county, city, government, state, federal, like they're going to just be like I said, hey, Mikey, let's pack up and leave. Like they have a vested interest. These people are leeching off the system. They got huge pensions. They're just sucking resources left and right, and they don't want to go away, right? And so it's like
Mm.
you look at what Lysander Spooner did, if you're familiar, where he set up a
Yep.
competition to the U.S. Postal Service, and guess what they did? They made it illegal. The government doesn't like competition, so they make it illegal. They can have a monopoly, and they'll use force to keep out competition, right? And so I think, like I said, if you did a neighborhood watch, cool, knock yourself out. Oh, if crime rates go down, hey, the police just get to collect a check and don't have to do quite as much work, so they'd be fine with something like that. But anything that would truly scale and could truly displace that function, at a broad scale, I think that there's zero chance they would allow it. I just that's
So we go towards the approach, and I'm working through this with you here, so stick with me. So let's say we go the approach you mentioned. We'll have free private sector police forces. Pepsi Cola police. Sure. Pepsi. Yeah, I'm from upstate New York. We had a lot of Pepsi Cola bottlers. That's the first company that came to my head. So Pepsi Cola, they're the police department. Let's just say they are, like, we start this tomorrow. So that means that they're competing against the existing local and state police departments, right? So
Well,
at
and
what
and other firms, right? Because obviously, the
Yep.
way markets work. There's not just one competitor, right? There's going to be all
Look,
sorts
yeah,
of them.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Add that in my equation. So at what point do you think that, to what you raised up earlier, some of those more we'll say the red leaning folks, the back the blue folks, who this has become part of their, this is their identity, right? We support law and order. At what point do you think that they would look at the Pepsi police, the Coke police, the Sprite police, and they would look at them on par with that local officer or that state police officer, and hold them in as high a regard that when, can I swear on the show?
Of course. Yeah.
So when shit hits the fan, they're calling Pepsi police versus New York police, right?
Well, that would be
What do
that
you
would be
think
day
that's
that
going
would
to
be
be?
day one, I think, for everybody, right? Not day one for
Why?
everybody. I just because I think everyone has this inherent understanding, and maybe it wouldn't be day one, but it'd be very quickly, right? If you opened up competition, you would see that there are cheaper alternatives to police, and there are more effective alternatives, right? So you would
Mhm.
have a marketing blitz. You would have startup companies forming, and there'd be an ad blitz, and you'd be like, hey, your neighbors would be, hey, which one are you going with? And it would be this, hey, everyone understands that the free market outperforms state monopolies every single time. Like we know this. Everybody knows this to be a fact. And if you just
Yep.
flipped a switch and said, hey, now you have a choice. You can go with your local police. If you want to back the blue, knock yourself out, you can go over here, or you can pay 10% of what you're. But the problem is too, it's very hard to quantify what you're paying because government likes to mix budgets together, right? So the individual, like, you don't get a bill for police, you don't get a bill for fire, you don't get a bill for any of the
Right.
services they provide. Like so it just gets all amalgamated into this big blob, and all you know is that the service sucks, it's super expensive, but you don't really know how much you're actually paying, right? So if you actually have an itemized bill And you could, I'm sure the competitive police forces would come up and say like, hey, look, I've done the analysis, right? Because obviously the government budgets are public, and they could sort of have,
Yeah, it's basic ROI
yeah,
stuff.
you could have an actuarial go through there like, hey, this is actually what you're paying on a per capita basis, and here's our service, and it's 10% of what you, hey, do you want to cancel your government police service, right? Like, I think that'd be a very easy argument to make, and I think it would take a very short period of time of opening it up to competition before people would choose alternative options, because there'd be infinite, because the way corporations are, they're greedy, which is awesome. They're like, hey, I want your money, and the only power I have over you is to delight you, right? To satisfy your desires better than all the other competitors, right? I'm trying to please you, and that's how I'm going to get rich, right? And so I think it would take very little time, but this is where I get back to, government's not going to allow it. Like, there's a 0% chance they're going to be like, oh yeah, go ahead and compete against us. Like,
Yep.
they have no incentive to do it, and honestly, they would do everything in their power, including work with corporate media to sort of push their message and say why you have to crack down on this, and these people are going to take advantage of you. I just, man, I'm just so skeptical of anything like that
So
ever happening.
I'm not calling you a nihilist, but like, what's the answer then if we look at all the possible options and we see? And by the way, going back to my sales guy mentality, like, these are objections, right? And I like to say, let's prevent objections versus having to respond to them. But let's do both, right? So with these objections, Brent, how would you overcome them, or how would you prevent these objections from becoming objections at the onset? Because if we, and this might just be me, so I'm going to speak for myself here. Like, I am the eternal optimist, right? I think the future looks bright. I think that despite all the bullshit we are facing, the biggest government we've ever seen on this planet, $34+ trillion in debt, I still believe that the future will look bright for us, because we're having this conversation. There are people listening to this conversation who think like us and who want to see the world be a better place. So I frame that to say, well, how do we address these problems that we are rightfully identifying here in both government, but also in the marketplace, for not bringing solutions to the table to solve these problems? What's the answer then? How do we either overcome these objections, prevent these objections, or am I missing something?
No, you're not. No, I've already answered the question, right? So we're over in this domain over here, and the answer is over here in the earlier domain where we talked about personal responsibility and getting people to, like I said, this is why I focus so much on ethics, right? You need to change people's minds. You have to get people out of this mindset they're in with respect to their relationship to government, right? Because I think everyone right now sort of sees it as what it is, right? Which is like, hey, I'm going to be on team A or team B, and whoever wins gets to be the bully, right? I think.
So do you think that Milton Friedman's framing actually might help us get there? Because
no.
And here's my, and can I give my context
sure.
to the question?
Yeah.
So if we're going to reduce where we are right now with government from thousands of things it does to literally just 3, do you think that would, by its nature of saying government's no longer doing these things, Beverly, like, you got to figure this shit out on your own, do you think that by its own would help improve personal responsibility in those respective areas? So now it's actually giving people more of a chance to focus on the other areas that we're limiting government to. And by the way, just to reiterate, this is not my ideal, but saying to get to where we want to go, is that at least a good middle ground?
I don't think so. Number one, I mean, I don't think it's I don't think it's possible to get there, right? But if we did, let's say by some miracle, like we got there, we would arrive there not by somebody decreeing it, but because people's hearts have changed, right? So individuals would have changed, would have adopted responsibility, would have understood that, hey, we need to act more ethically towards each other, and it would have been like a reflection of a societal change. Like you said, politics is downstream from culture, right? So people would have made that change, and if they got all the way to that point right there, like, I don't see why we just wouldn't go to the final end point, which is like, hey, how about we just have a voluntary society? Like, I don't understand why people are so just clawing to hold on to this idea that we need government.
I'll tell you why. It's because we have, as humans, an instinctual adherence to the status quo. This is who we are as people. I deal with this all the time in business, right? Like, I when I'm selling, I'm not selling against a competitor. If I have to sell against a competitor, like, I'm going to be cocky right now, I'm going to kick their ass. But if I'm competing against the status quo, bring the big guns, because the status quo is just the manifestation of the words, well, we've always done things this way.
Yes. Oh.
Right? So in that mentality, it's not so much that we're competing against somebody else. We're having to compete against the status quo. So if I'm going in trying to sell this solution, right? To sell a different way of doing things, I need to be able to not just like convince the stakeholders in the company that this is going to be a better way of doing things, but we have to like show the land and expand route, right? And this kind of goes back to what you were like, well, I don't know why people just wouldn't jump on board with the voluntary society. And I think, Brent, the answer is because when you go to, and I'm just going to use the company analogy, right? Let's just say America's a company, even though it technically kind of is too, by the way, but that's a whole different podcast. But like, if you look at America as, America Inc., and I'm going in trying to sell brand new cybersecurity software, whatever it may be. And I know that they have like a million other areas from cybersecurity that they need help. I can't go in and sell them a $10 billion solution, right? Even though I can do it. And I know that they're going to be objectively better if they were to buy this $10 billion solution from me. The difference is that I need to get buy-in. So what the best plan of attack that we've seen work in B2B, B2C sales is you go in and we do what's called land and expand. So you go in with what's the easiest, lowest entry, lowest bar to entry in whatever industry you're in. Solve that problem first, prove that you can do it well, and then use that as building credibility. And we know people do business, people who what? They know, like, and trust. So you help them know you now. They like you. And now that you're building that trust, right? Now you're seeing, oh, these people aren't just talking a good game. They're actually making things better. So while we wanted to go from 0 to 100 overnight, sell that $10 billion solution, it might take 10 years. And that's okay. I genuinely think that's okay. Because if you're able to start to show that you can do what you say you're going to do and you do it well, that builds stakeholders in the company that now will promote us away from the status quo. Hey, this company's been doing a really good job with our cybersecurity here. They can do penetration testing too. Why aren't they doing that for us? And then, well, hey, they did the penetration testing for us. Why aren't they doing like quarterly audits just so we don't have to, do everything at once every year? Okay, well, now we're doing quarterly audits. So why aren't we doing like, CMMC preparedness and stuff? And you can just start to dig into the weeds of growing this account. But it was like we went in with the mentality of, well, they need all this right now. It's true. And I think that's where we're saying the same thing, but we're skating past each other a little bit here, Brent, is that I agree with you. I want to get to that point. But where we are, it's darn near impossible to just flip that switch overnight and get the sale into place. And here's the other part too, right? We talk about making the sale. The part that often gets forgotten is the provisioning and the implementation. I promise you this is going to make sense when it comes to politics, because you can sell a solution. I've had people do this. They sell, the solution, they do a great job, and then they sign the paperwork and provisioning drops the ball. They don't know what's happening during the sales cycle. So they're missing something, or something happens in the implementation. That happens on small projects. Just imagine you sold again, $10 billion project to USA Inc. And then just this, again, silly example. Do you think it's going to be hard from a project management standpoint to get everything provisioned and implemented in the way it needs to be so it's done properly so we don't burn trust, right? Because I've seen this happen. There's a competitor that it was in the contact center space. They told the company they could do everything AI. And this is like recently last year. Everything AI. Oh, the new AI thing for call transcription. We can do that. Sentiment analysis. We can do that. They sell this to, and I would say the company's name, you would know the company. They're a huge company, and maybe they have boats out in the water that are huge cruise ships. I don't know. Just use your imagination there. They sold this solution, and within 1 year, that company was on to a different contact center provider, because the company that sold it to them not only did a terrible job at implementing and provisioning their solution, but the worst part, Brent, they burnt the trust. So now those stakeholders, not only were they not on board with the solution, they are actively against the solution. They are actively promoting their competitors because they saw what happened when they got burned. So my fear is, as a sales guy, we have to do this right. We can't burn our customers, which in this case is our voters. So I look at somebody like a Javier Milei. I don't care if people like him or hate him. He's going into Argentina and he's trying to show he's doing what he said he would do in a way that he said he was going to do it. Now, are there other areas that you can critique Javier Milei? Of course, just as there should be, because he doesn't have the magic wand that we want. So in that mentality, what can we do? I think the best thing we can do is find people who they're on board with our ideas, bring our solutions so it's easy to implement, and land and expand, earn their trust. And that's why I go back to local governments. It's way easier to land and expand in little Muncie, Indiana, than it is to go to, heck, where you are in Nashville, right? It's a lot easier to do Muncie, Indiana than Nashville, Indiana, just based on the sheer scope and size. Now, let's take it a step further. It's probably a lot easier to change Nashville, Indiana than it is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And heck, changing Philadelphia, Pennsylvania might be easier than changing New York City. So like I think that's where we have to change our perspective and our tactics, right? It's not so much that one solution is better than the other. Like, yeah, I agree, but it's a matter of how do we actually get the solutions implemented without burning people. So they look at us as not snake oil salesmen. They look at us as people who are actual trusted advisors who care about the customer, the voter in this case, and we want to make things tangibly better, but we're not going to do so at the expense of doing it right. So I hope that better encapsulated my perspective.
It totally did, and it's just so funny that
Cool.
like you said I'm potentially nihilistic, and I'm really not. I'm optimistic as well.
No, I know. I apologize.
No. That's a fair assessment based on the way I was talking. But what I will say is I think that you and I are on completely different planets when it comes to where we are today and how we move forward, right? So I think you're still in this mindset of like we can roll it back, right? You can.
I actually don't think that's
Oh, you
the
don't
case.
think so? Okay.
I think no. I think to the opposite, right? We have to stop looking at the way that we are right now and saying, well, if only we got back to doing X, Y, Z. I think we need to completely fundamentally change the way that we approach local governance and local politics. So that's my point, is that if we can bring our solutions that are inherently different than the way that things have always been done, specifically in local office, right? So like, think about it. I can literally walk down the street right now to my town hall, and I could go talk to a city councilman right now. I know that city councilman, he has political aspirations, and he might be the next assemblyman. So when you move up the ranks politically as well, you're now able to take what you had as a case study from that city councilman when you brought this idea to the table. And this is just a silly example of using the city councilman, but then you can help produce better options in that land and expand model, not just in the locality, but now we can bring these different ideas up to the state level, and we can prove our merits there. Much back to the original ideas of the Constitution, right? The Articles of Confederation were built before the Constitution to help create an environment where each state was basically their own little country, an own little like laboratory for freedom. So we have to go back to that mentality. And I think if we were able to start building better solutions that prove their merit in the local community, that just by and large should prove itself on a larger level, and it should be able to scale, but not so much scale in the government perspective, but scale in the public adoption perspective, seeing that this works and it's not going back and doing things the way we used to. It's a completely different perspective. And frankly, it's probably going to be an alien perspective to a lot of folks because they're just so much on board with this is how we always have done things. So I don't want to go back and actually do things the way they used to be. I think we need to do a new approach. It's just the way we sell it. That's really where I think we're maybe talking past each other a little bit.
Yeah, what I meant by roll back was like reduce the size and scope of government, right? Like go back that way, right? By whatever tactics, right? So I just meant rolling it back that way. Like I think that we're so close to the end of this thing. I think that I said I'm not nihilistic. I'm a realist. I'm an empiricist. I've seen the way this is trending for a long time. I've seen the degradation of the general public. It's bad. Like there's a lot of hurting people. There's a lot of really broken people, a lot of people that just are cynical. They don't care about how they treat their fellow man. Like I said, the whole libertine thing, like everyone's out of control. It's a lot of this isn't good. And so what concerns me is there's going to be a time where we do have a choice, right? Like we could take a different route. And I think there's going to be a time where it's sort of thrust on us. There's going to be some sort of social unrest. There's going to be a thing that just sort of confronts everybody. And then you're going to have to figure it out. And this is why I've been so laser focused on improving myself and trying to help people improve. Because we need good people either way, right? Like I would love it if people just made a different choice and be like, hey, let's go change the way we're doing things. I suspect being a student of history is like, hey, these things, republics always seem to crash and burn, and then you have to go figure out something afterwards. So if we are in a situation where there is some sort of conflict, and then, hey, what are we going to build on top of it? I want the best people possible out there trying to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to move forward, right? So it's one of those two approaches. Like either we're going to, voluntarily decide to treat each other better and try to do something different, or we're going to let this thing burn and then it's going to be complete chaos and to be a lot of pain and hard times. So the whole, the hard times, strong people, like that whole cycle, it tends to repeat. And so I fear that we're getting kind of towards the end, and I'm really kind of encouraging everyone to put on the brakes and look at themselves, trying to maybe stop hating on your neighbor, your friends, people on social media, because man, it's doing nothing good. So hopefully that illuminates maybe where we have some differences and how we see it, because I'm not saying that your approach is wrong, your strategy is wrong. I just know that without changing people's hearts and minds and having people be behave completely differently than they are right now, we're in a whole lot of trouble.
And by the way, Brent, I agree with you. I feel like the Freedom Tunes Dave Rubin skit. I agree. But I do agree with you. I very much feel that we are at a tipping point, right? I hate to even use these types of words, but we're kind of at the most important election of our lifetime, right? Like we've seen that the size and scope of government has exponentially been increasing, and you go over the past 10 years, it seems like they got pedal to the metal. So I hear you, and I think your concerns are 100% valid, man. I look at it from I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think we can make better people, change hearts and minds, without it having to be when we've gone to the worst of where we're headed, right? I think if we were able to work with people in our communities, and again, this is why I think it's so important for us to surround ourselves in communities with people who not only think like us, but have the same values, the same morals, and believe in a better future, not just for themselves, but for their kids as well. You have one side of the political aisle who they celebrate killing their kids. And I'm not going to go into a whole abortion debate, but like that is where we are as a society. Half the society doesn't care about the future and the other half does. So I'm going to challenge people that like find your tribe. And that doesn't have to be libertarian, right? Mm-hmm. It could be a variety of different things that you could find as your northern light, right? Or your northern star rather. So whatever your northern star is, find it, and then find people who think, act, speak, are moral, are principled, have values, and care about the future. Because I am weary not so much of what you mentioned from just a end of society kind of perspective, but with that, if you were to couple in nihilism, not from you, but from the folks out there who are like, none of this matters, the cynicism, the nihilism, like, no, I got a 1-year-old daughter, man. Like I got a future we got to build for this little girl. And I know there are people out there like that. So I'm going to find more of them, right? I'm going to try to build something better right now as things are heading towards the proverbial fan. And when it does hit there, I'm hoping that the community I've built with the solutions that we're bringing to the table put us in a much better spot to move things forward, versus if we do look at what's happening and we just say, it's happening, what are we going to do? Which I'm not saying you're saying that. I know you're not. But there are people who do that, right? They just toss their hands up, the catastrophists, mm-hmm. They take the black pill. Yep. Like, I don't want that. I don't want a civil war. I don't want a national divorce. May we end up there? We might. But I'm going to do my darndest to stop us from getting to that point. National divorce might be better than a civil war. No, national divorce would be better than a civil war.
I would be happy with those 2 Christmases, man. You would do national divorce tomorrow. I'm like, okay, cool. Like I don't have an issue with that at all.
So I had Daniel Miller on my show from Texit, and he paints the best picture for a pro national divorce argument. So for anybody who wants to hear that argument laid out as perfect as I've ever heard it. Check out Daniel Miller. He's been on my show a few times, and I actually think Texas is this year voting on secession.
Hmm.
It got to the ballot. That was a huge ballot initiative that they were focusing on to get the GOP to put that into the referendum to the populace. So that is something that's on the ballot, or at least it was supposed to be in Texas. So things are happening in that regards from a national divorce standpoint. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I think we're already kind of getting to a point where red states and blue states are splitting up, I
Yes.
guess. Like what was the expression during COVID? Quiet
Yeah.
quitting. It's like we're quietly divorcing. Like the texts have stopped coming through. No more good morning texts. No more hey, how you doing?
Yep.
I think we're starting to see other people, and maybe it's time.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm totally fine with that. That would be it's certainly preferable to civil war. I think we can all agree there. Like having
Yeah, no, Civil War bad, no bueno.
yeah.
Like lots of pain, suffering. Like no,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
good.
cool. So I think we're in pretty much agreement, or at least know where each other stands on this. So I want to pivot to wind with a fun topic, a lighthearted topic.
Love it.
Yeah. So let's
No more doom and gloom. Yes.
It's going to be spicy though, man. So just I got to prepare. Don't get in a little bit of trouble here. I don't want to lose my channel. But you opened with some comments about the drag queen story hour and the trans issues and stuff. And so I wanted to ask you, and just full transparency, this is not something I care about a whole lot. I think that the right gets drug into this issue, and I don't think it does them any good or does most people any good. So maybe you can help me figure out, what do I have wrong? Why should I care more about this sort of particular culture war topic?
Do you want your kid coming home and being like, "Daddy, can boys be girls"?
I don't care, right? So no, hold on a second. I love questions, right? And I just deeply love discussions about important and difficult subjects with my children, right? And so
Mhm.
with my kids, I've never begrudged them any question, right? Like bring me anything at all. I'm happy to talk about it. Let's have a discussion, right? So for me as a dad, I'm like, man, there's nothing more I love than having a discussion with my kids about important and complicated and difficult topics. Like that's like joy for me, pure joy. Um, so I don't care. Yeah, if somebody comes home and says, "Can a boy be a girl?" It's like, hey, let's talk about it, right? Like I'm happy to have that conversation. I don't.
Would you be curious as to where that thought came from?
No, I probably know, right? Like that's probably
No.
coming. No, I'm saying like I would know. Essentially, it's probably
Oh,
coming from either something on TikTok, or it's going to come from the public schools, or it's going to come from the friends. Like I know the culture is sort of like pushing that narrative forward, right? So I know where it's coming from.
so my answer is, when you look at Gen Z right now, I think the most recent numbers was over 25% of them are identifying as LGBTQAI
Sure.
plus, whatever the terminologies are now. That alone, hyper concerning, and not because of the fact that they're identifying different ways, but because if you look at historical trends, that never happened
Yep, a
before.
huge
So
outlier. From a data science perspective,
huge.
like there has never been an increase like that, and so there's something going on for sure.
Right. And that goes back to why I think this is an issue, because reality matters, right? We can't, so I can't go into a business conversation with somebody and they're like, I have $400 bazillion in revenue. So my budget is whatever I want it to be. I'm going to look at that person and be like, dude, this isn't a real conversation. Like that's not how budgets work, my man. And I know you don't have a $400 bazillion line of revenue. So we have to be able to have conversations in the real world. So if I'm now taking that and addressing it from a societal standpoint, we need to be able to talk about that men are men and girls are girls, women are women. Like if we can't even agree on basics of biology, then when we start to talk about bigger issues, right, which goes into men going into women's locker rooms, or going into we're seeing men taking over women's sports, whatever your opinion is on that, there is absolutely a societal impact on our inability to live in the real world, right? Because if we had the testicular fortitude to look at nonsensical questions like what is a boy and what is a girl, and just say, just like in kindergarten cop, a boy has a penis and a girl has a vagina. Like that's how basic the conversation should be. And I'm finding, Brent, the reason I take this to be so personally like annoying is that it feels like government schools are purposely promoting this garbage to kids, and then in turn kids promoting it on social media, right? And we're creating an environment where kids are no longer living in the real world, but rather they're being promoted and pumped up this fake nonsensical world that not only is completely made up but ignores basic biological realities. That's setting them up in a neurochemical standpoint to be unable to make rational logical decisions in the future. Like there's a story, I forget the specifics, but there was a girl who's in the woods and she grew up with like the wolves, and people were out hiking and they found this girl, and she was like 17 years old, and they're like, come with us, girl, away from the wolves. And she just would growl at them and snap at them because that's what she had learned. So they get her into society, and after like I think a couple of months or so, she could say like hungry and stuff like that. But then when you take it a step further, like trying to teach her English or like have ability to comprehend what's happening, she just couldn't do it because those neural pathways were never developed. I think what we're going to find 20, 40, 60 years down the road is that our inability to help create a situation for children where the reality is set for them as what it is, reality, and not trying to make a 4-year-old question if little Billy is a boy or a girl. That's conversations that children should not even be in the purview of thinking about. And candidly, like I'm going to make it a point for my daughter not to be on these social media apps or to not have access to the tablets or the smartphones, because I don't want her having a fake lens into this completely made up world where it's like, whose lie is it anyway? Points don't matter and everything's made up, right? Like that is what it feels like we've created when we're talking about gender. Now, you're 100% right, man. Conservative commentators and pundits, they're taking this whole thing and they're like they're monetizing on it to like the nth degree. And I get it. It's gross in my opinion, but there is 100% a real concern here that we have to address as a society. I think if we refuse to, we're going to just put ourselves in a way worse spot as we try to build things better in the future, because the people that should be building them will have no real context of what's real and what's not. So I just think as a societal standpoint, it's important for us to have these conversations with our kids in real life and based in
Mhm.
reality, and not let people plant these seeds, specifically if they're coming from our government institutions like government schools, and then having that creep out into government funded social media apps like TikTok. Like, it just makes sense that there is more to this narrative than just simply kids starting to have conversations about maybe I like boys or maybe I like girls or maybe I'm both. Like, that's not how kids think. When I was 4, I wanted to be a conductor for Thomas the Tank Engine. Like, I wasn't thinking about, am I a boy or a girl? Like, that's just not a question a kid has. And if there is a kid that has that question, God bless that poor kid. They are an exception to the rule, and they need to be loved and taken care of by their parents. Like have that parent work with them, be there for them, but don't reaffirm their insecurities and reaffirm, pardon the expression, but mental illness. Like, we have an obligation to help our kids see the real life, be there for them, be empathetic, but also help them understand what's real and what's not.
Yeah, thank you for that, and
Yeah.
I appreciate that because it's a pretty explosive subject, right? And I try to approach it in a rational, sober, sensible, empirical way. Uh, and part of the reason I don't like the like you call, there's a lot of people are monetizing it, but I think it also, it's like the Streisand effect, right? It invites more, right? Like when you
Yep.
when
That's absolutely
it's
fair.
like, it's almost like the left and the right are like siblings, and if you poke them a certain way and they squeal, it's like, oh, I'm going to poke you twice as hard, right? So I think by focusing on it, you invite more of it, right? And second of all, I think you can, this is a great opportunity, like I said, to have a discussion. Maybe not, there's certain age appropriateness to it, sure, right? And I'm not saying that there's no detrimental impacts from this. Obviously, there is a social contagion component to it. I think the literature seems to indicate that females are more susceptible to it than males are, which is why you see, like, when you talk about that giant exponential curve we see in this stuff, is clustered around the girls more. But ultimately, I think most rational people are not the caricature crazy leftists that say there's literally no difference between biological males and biological females, right? Like most
Yep.
rational people uh, that that are in this space talking about these ideas will say, like, look, we understand this is actually a biological male or a biological female that is choosing to identify and present, right? Like have some
Mhm.
secondary sex characteristics that are opposite of their sex, right? Like we understand that, and everyone that I know that talks about it has a separate category for this from a philosophical perspective. You have trans men, trans women. It's a separate category, right? I know that there's a lot of this, these slogans that are like trans women are women, right? Like, and there's this understanding that they're trying to push, which is like, hey, we want to make this an equivalent. But even the people that want it's a mantra that's asking for acceptance, right? Because you're asking society to view them in a particular way, but everyone at base level, I don't think there's a lot of people. There are some who completely reject reality, right? These are coming from the postmodernist school, right? Which they say, like, look, objective reality, you can't know anything about it, and everything in society is nothing but power games between groups, right? And everything's socially constructed. There are those people out there, but they're very few and far between, right? Like I think most people have got a pretty sober analysis, and I think the reason you don't hear about it is that most people are terrified to talk about the subject, right? Like people don't want to get canceled, they don't want social ostracism, they don't want to deal with an argument or whatever. But I guess to me, this doesn't seem like the biggest problem in the world. I think there's a whole lot worse problems to focus on, and like I said, Streisand effect, inviting more of it in. Like it seems like if you want to talk about strategy, this doesn't feel like a great strategy to get up in arms and outraged about it. It's like, hey, you don't like the government schools teaching this? Guess what? Pull your kids out and homeschool. That would be awesome. I would love to see more of that, right? So, that I guess this is the way I'm looking at it. Tell me where I'm wrong or if you disagree with anything I said.
I just think, again, I'm the context guy. I think additional context is needed, right? So then the question needs to be asked. So why is this a conversation right now? Right, beyond your perspective of the Streisand effect, why did this become a conversation? Where did this come from? And it's not organic, right? And I think that's the part we have to really acknowledge. This whole dialogue, the transing the kids, the can kids go to drag queen story hour, like this all didn't just pop up, right? This is targeted. This is a campaign. This is something that a group has really made it a focus to bring to the kids, and we have to acknowledge that that is what's actually happening. It isn't just some organic thing that just pops up and all of a sudden, oh, those kids again, they're talking about whether or not they're boys or girls. Like it's there are forces here at play that are manipulating the dialogue and manipulating the discourse. So certain topics that normally would never be a topic of discussion get popped into the mainstream. So now you have main news stations talking about transing the kids. That right there, I think, speaks to that. Even though it might not, like, I agree with you, this is not the most important issue, but it's an issue. And if we neglect to discuss the issue as it becomes an issue, and we neglect to understand how it became an issue, then I think we have no right to complain once we've seen the impacts of said issue down the road in our not addressing it. And I think you're right. You're spot on that there are people like you who they can attack this no problem. Like, let me have a conversation with my kids. But for every one of you, Brent, and every one of me, there are parents out there who are working 3 jobs, just trying to make ends meet. And they're not paying attention to every single social conversation that their kids are having, or every single, conversation about gender or sex. Like they're not in that world. And candidly, a lot of it is because the parents of today, this was never a conversation. This wasn't a thing because, again, it didn't exist. So it goes back to, there's definitely something behind the scenes here from a narrative standpoint that has brought this to the forefront. And on the other side of it, if we don't have a conversation, that means it's going to be a one-sided dialogue. And I think it's on us to, even if you don't think it's a super big deal, it's on us to at least say, this is wrong. And this isn't This isn't, a situation where we can just, go on the feels. How do you feel today, Timmy? Do you want to be a little girl or a little boy? Like that's not the conversation that we should be allowing to happen. We need to be confident in saying, listen, no, we gotta live in a real world. Boys are boys and girls are girls. That's that. And it's not a matter of trying to be mean. It's not a matter of trying to like shut down conversation, but rather acknowledging that this is a completely fabricated conversation. This conversation didn't exist in the mainstream until what, 10 years ago? And it's only gotten worse and worse as things have gone on. So I think that's the additional context that we should add to this. But beyond that, I mean, I think you're spot on when it comes to like having parental conversations, but we also need to acknowledge the elephant in the room that for every one of us who will have those dialogues because we're tuned in and we are paying attention, there are parents who just they don't have the bandwidth. They're not plugged into the social conversations of the day, and they might not have the laser focus in their kids' lives. I think that's the area that we need to be able to walk a fine line. But other than that, I think you were pretty close.
Yeah, and I agree. I just, I guess I'm not feeling the need to control it so much. Right there, it's almost like when I have discussions with people about, well, what happens if you got rid of the government? How would you solve this? Like, you know what? There's no utopia. Like being a human being, there will never be any situation where you're in utopia. There's always going to be problems, and I'm not saying
Yep.
or trying to minimize the problems associated with it. I think there's a lot of people are going to be harmed with it, but I think like everything else, that is how society progresses. Like you go through these phases, there's this thing and it happens, and then people are harmed by it and people learn, and then people course correct, right? And I feel terrible for some people are getting swept up in it, because I think some people, especially the ones that are making life altering decisions, right? There's plenty of examples of people that transition, they have surgery, they get sterilized, they detransition, they can't have kids anymore. It's heartbreaking. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's not my choice, right? It's one of those things where I have empathy for these people. I feel bad for these people, but I also feel bad for people that do have legitimate gender dysphoria, that are struggling with these types of issues. And I don't think that some people just are mean to these people, right? And
Yeah, don't be a Matt Walsh. Like,
yeah,
don't be a dick about
that's
it. No.
what I'm saying, right? It's like I always try to lead with empathy and love, and just be like, look, I try to stay in my lane for the most part. Like I will give the best advice. I'll have a good faith conversation with anyone. I'll give everyone the respect that they deserve as a human being. I will state my case. I will make valid arguments. I will give people a hug, whatever. But at the end of the day, like to me, it's like I don't have a dog in this particular fight, right? I just don't, and I don't feel the need to police other people's language about it. If society wants to have a conversation about what category, like how we're going to categorize somebody as being in the boys' club or the girls' club or an in betwixt, to me, it's like I've got so many other more important things. And I do agree with you, by the way. I will say, like, this is definitely being driven by something. And I think I know what it is. I'm actually meeting with Helen Pluckrose, if you know who that is, meeting her in London in September to talk about this. She's an expert in sort of where, critical theory, queer theory, all these things that are coming out of that Foucault, Derrida, school of postmodernism, right? And so I get it. It's coming through the universities. I know how it's infecting the society and the narratives being pushed. I agree with you, like on all of that stuff. But like I said, like when you look at society in sum total, man, we have a lot of really big issues out there. And to me, this one feels like a little bit of a distraction, although like I said, I will concede to anyone that there are real world harms, real world impacts, and my heart goes out to anyone who's impacted by this stuff. But ultimately, like to your point, I have a lot of I'm not black pilled. Like I have a lot of faith in society's ability to talk things out, which is why I chose this topic, because it's very provocative and it's very difficult to have a conversation like this without getting in trouble with somebody. But I think it's important, right? Like I really honestly do. So what I'm looking to do is trying to sort of make a bridge between the two sides, because I think, as you called out rightly in the beginning, there's this aspect of human psychology called psychological reactance. You know about it in sales. That's that. So as soon as you start putting up defenses and start fighting with each other, both sides dig in even harder. And so what I'm looking to do is try to find some sort of common ground somewhere in the middle where we can actually talk to each other instead of around, past, at each other,
Mhm.
snipe at each other. And so that was the intention of the question, right? So I think you understand my position and why I asked that question. So hopefully you understood the spirit behind it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think, there's going to be some areas that you and I probably will have some disagreements. That's okay, right?
Yep.
Like that's why we are here to have these dialogues.
Yep, that's the interesting part in my view. Like, I don't think somebody having a conversation where everyone's like nodding along, yep, me too, buddy. Woo! Like, that's not an interesting conversation. I want to talk about the spicy
Isn't it
stuff.
fun when we all just agree? Come on,
Oh, I
man.
get so annoyed, so annoyed. Well, hey, man, we're about at time. I want to ask you one final short question, though.
Yeah.
You're talking a lot of stuff around cybersecurity and tech. I'm in tech, right? So I work for one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and so I just wanted to ask kind of what your day job is. Like, what are you selling?
Yeah, so I've been in the world of tech for a while now. I started out, we were selling at my old company in the world of your unified communications platforms.
Mm.
So the internal phone systems, and then cybersecurity, bandwidth solutions. And then actually around this time last year, I navigated during my move to a different company. I'm still in the tech space, but same church, different pew, went to the contact center as a software space. So doing a lot with the technology in the back end that powers contact centers, not the ones that you hate, though, right? And that's the thing. We are creating contact centers that people love, or at the very least don't hate as much, because who wants to sit there and go through 14 different button presses only to get hung up on because you didn't hit the right one? Yeah, that sucks. So I lead a sales team. I'm actually a sales executive. I'm a sales coach. I teach how to do outbound prospecting. I'm not just in the tech space. I also do this for businesses as well on my side hustle. So how do you build strong outbound sales processes that turn calls into customers, right? That's the main vision. So being able to help understand, how do you create a value statement? How do you understand the real objections? How can you pre-frame objections and block objections? All these little things, we kind of actually talked about today that I use in the business world, I actually bring over to the world of politics. That's kind of my whole shtick in this world, is bringing that stuff that we see work in business to politics. So, yeah, man, I love doing the outbound motion. I find it really cool to be able to bring an idea, or in this case, a service, to a group of people who desperately need it, and show the value, or at the very least, help build the value. So, yeah, that's my day job. I love it. Coaching, teaching, that's one of the things I like to do.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, so just by way of background, we got to chat offline about this stuff because that's actually my space. I came from a place where we're doing call center software as a service. I've done it at two different companies. I work with BPO, overseas
Yeah.
call centers like cloud computing, and I've done UC systems. I have a background in telephony. So anyway, I don't want to bore the rest of the viewers here, but yeah, we got to connect offline, man. We are swimming in the same
Oh, for
waters.
sure.
Yeah, I lead cybersecurity teams now. This is all right in my right meat and potatoes for for what you're talking about.
I love it. Yeah, that's awesome. I had no idea.
Yeah, me either. So yeah, I just got heard. I kept hearing all these little phrases. I'm like, oh wow, we are swimming in similar waters. But
I know that word. I know that acronym.
oh, but dude, hey, thank you so much for pulling up with me. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I just enjoyed the hell out of it. Why don't you tell
Likewise.
everyone who's not familiar with you where they can find you?
Absolutely. And by the way, Brent, I can't agree more. Like, this has been one of my favorite podcast episodes to date. So for my show, I'm the host of, right behind me here, the Brian Nichols Show. I've been hosting the show since 2018. The goal of the show every single time is to leave people educated, enlightened, and informed. So how do we do that? We meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. So instead of trying to win political arguments, we're teaching you how to sell your ideas. And I know there's so many people out there who hear the word sales and they get like a knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, sales, gross. No, no, no. Everything is sales. You're selling yourself, an idea, a product, a service, or your politics. So at the end of the day, we try to take not just the approach of how to sell our ideas, but then bring the actual solutions to the table. So I'm interviewing guests from across the world, across the country, and we're talking about, hey, here's a problem we see. You're bringing a solution to the table. How does it address these problems, and how can we get more of your solutions spread far and wide? That's really the goal, and actually very much the context of our conversation today, is building these solutions without asking for permission from the government. So you can find me at briannicholsshow.com. All the episodes, all 845
Woo!
episodes I think we have
Wow.
there, of the show going back to 2018. Plus, we have some awesome content over on YouTube, Rumble, wherever it is you get your favorite video podcasts. And then as for me, you can find me on Twitter, X, Facebook, Instagram at B Nichols Liberty. I think that covers it.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time, man. Like I said, I
Sure.
can't tell you how much I appreciated this and enjoyed it. So please be on again. I would love to continue the conversation.
Absolutely, my man. And we're going to have you on the show very, very soon. We got to talk, and we got to talk offline.
Yeah,
so
anytime.
We're going to keep the dialogue going.
100%. All right. Thank you, man.
You got it. Rock and roll. See ya.